This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Aaron Matte. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has arrived in Washington as part of his bid to stop a nuclear deal with Iran. Netanyahu will address the lobby group AIPAC today, followed by a controversial speech before Congress on Tuesday. The visit comes just as Iran and 6 world powers, including the U.S., are set to resume talks in a bid to meet a March 31st deadline. At the White House, Press Secretary Josh Earnest said Netanyahu's trip won't threaten the outcome.
I think the short answer to that is I don't think so. And the reason is simply that there is a real opportunity for us here. And the president is hopeful that we are going to have an opportunity to do what is clearly in the best interests of the United States and Israel, which is to resolve the international community's concerns about Iran's nuclear program at the negotiating table.
The trip has sparked the worst public rift between the U.S. and Israel in over 2 decades. Dozens of Democrats could boycott Netanyahu's address to Congress, which was arranged by House Speaker John Boehner without consulting the White House. The Obama administration will send 2 officials, National Security Advisor Susan Rice and UN Ambassador Samantha Power, to address the AIPAC summit today. This comes just days after Rice called Netanyahu's visit, quote, destructive.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is also facing domestic criticism for his unconventional Washington visit, which comes just 2 weeks before an election in which he seeks a 3rd term in Israel. On Sunday, a group representing nearly 200 of Israel's top retired military and intelligence officials accused Netanyahu of assaulting the U.S.-Israel alliance. But despite talk of a U.S. and Israeli dispute, the Obama administration has taken pains to display its staunch support for the Israeli government. Speaking just today in Geneva, Secretary of State John Kerry blasted the UN Human Rights Council for what he called an obsession and bias against Israel. The council is expected to release a report in the coming weeks on potential war crimes in Israel's U.S.-backed Gaza assault last summer. For more, we spend the hour today with world-renowned political dissident, linguist, author Noam Chomsky. He has written over 100 books, most recently on Western terrorism from Hiroshima to drone warfare. His forthcoming book, co-authored with Ilan Pappé, is titled On Palestine and will be out next month. Noam Chomsky is Institute Professor Emeritus at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he's taught for more than 50 years. Noam Chomsky, it's great to have you back here at Democracy Now!, and particularly in our very snowy outside but warm inside New York studio.
Delighted to be here again.
Well, Noam, let's start with Netanyahu's visit. He is set to make this unprecedented joint address to Congress, unprecedented because of the kind of rift it has demonstrated between the Republicans and the Democratic president, President Obama. Can you talk about its significance?
For both Prime Minister Netanyahu and the hawks in Congress, mostly Republican, the primary goal is to undermine any potential negotiation that might settle whatever issue there is with Iran. They have a common interest in ensuring that there is no regional force that can serve as any kind of deterrent to Israeli and U.S. violence, the major violence in the region. And it is, if we believe U.S. intelligence, I don't see any reason not to, their analysis is that if Iran is developing nuclear weapons, which they don't know, it would be part of their deterrent strategy. Their general strategic posture is one of deterrence. They have low military expenditures. According to U.S. intelligence, their strategic doctrine is to try to prevent an attack up to the point where diplomacy can set in. I don't think anyone with a gray cell functioning thinks that they would ever conceivably use a nuclear weapon or even try to. The country would be obliterated in 15 seconds. But they might provide a deterrent of sorts. And the U.S. and Israel certainly don't want to tolerate that. They are the forces that carry out regular violence and aggression in the region and don't want any impediment to that. For the Republicans in Congress, there's another interest, namely to undermine anything that Obama, the Antichrist, might try to do. So that's a separate issue there. The Republicans stopped being an ordinary parliamentary party some years ago. They were described, I think, accurately by Norman Ornstein, very respected conservative political analyst, American Enterprise Institute. He said the party has become a radical insurgency which has abandoned any commitment to parliamentary democracy. And their goal for the last years has simply been to undermine anything that Obama might do in an effort to regain power and serve their primary constituency, which is the very wealthy and the corporate sector. They try to conceal this with all sorts of other means, and doing so they've had to, you can't get votes that way, so they've had to mobilize sectors of the population which have always been there but were never mobilized into an organized political force. Evangelical Christians, extreme nationalists, terrified people who have to carry guns into Starbucks because somebody might be after them, and so on and so forth. That's a big force. And inspiring fear is not very difficult in the United States. It's a long history, back to colonial times, of as an extremely frightened society, which is an interesting story in itself, and mobilizing people in fear of them, whoever them happens to be, is an effective technique used over and over again. And right now, the Republicans have their non-policy has succeeded in putting them back in a position of at least congressional power. So the attack on, this is a personal attack on Obama and intended that way, is simply part of that general effort. But there is a common strategic concern underlying it, I think, and that is pretty much what U.S. intelligence analyzes, preventing any deterrent in the region to U.S. and Israeli actions.
You say that nobody with a great cell thinks that Iran would launch a strike were it to have nuclear weapons, but yet Netanyahu repeatedly accuses Iran of planning a new genocide against the Jewish people. He said this most recently on Holocaust Remembrance Day in January, saying that the Ayatollahs are planning a new Holocaust against us. And that's an argument that's taken seriously here.
It's taken seriously by people who don't stop to think for a minute. But again, Iran is under extremely close surveillance. U.S. Satellite surveillance knows everything that's going on in Iran. If Iran even began to load a missile, that is, to bring a missile near a weapon, the country would probably be wiped out. And whatever you think about the clerics, the Guardian Council, and so on, there's no indication that they're suicidal.
The premise of these talks, Iran gets to enrich uranium in return for a lifting of U.S. sanctions. Do you see that as a fair parameter? Does the U.S. have the right to begin with to be imposing sanctions on Iran?
Doesn't. What are the right to impose sanctions? Iran should be imposing sanctions on us. I mean, it's worth remembering when you hear the White House spokesman talk about the international community wants to Iran to do this and that. It's important to remember that the phrase international community in U.S. discourse refers to the United States and anybody who may be happening to go along with it. That's the international community. If the international community is the world, it's quite a different story. So 1 or 2 years ago, the former non-aligned movement, it's a large majority of the population of the world, had their regular conference in Iran, in Tehran, and they once again vigorously supported Iran's right to develop nuclear power as a signer of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. That's the international community. The United States and its allies are outliers, as is usually the case. And as far as sanctions are concerned, it's worth bearing in mind that it's now 60 years since, during the past 60 years, not a day has passed without the U.S. torturing the people of Iran. It began with overthrowing the parliamentary regime and installing a tyrant, the Shah, supporting the Shah through very serious human rights abuses and terror and violence. As soon as he was overthrown, almost instantly the United States turned to supporting Iraq's attack against Iran, which was a brutal and violent attack. The U.S. provided critical support for it. It pretty much won the war for Iraq by entering directly at the end. After the war was over, the U.S. instantly supported sanctions against Iran, and though this is kind of suppressed, it's important. This is George H.W. Bush now. He was in love with Saddam Hussein. He authorized further aid to Saddam in opposition to the Treasury and others. He sent a presidential delegation, a congressional delegation to Iran. It was April 1989, headed by Bob Dole, the congressional leader.
Iraq? Sent to Iraq?
To Iraq, sorry. Yeah. To offer his greetings to Saddam, his friend, to assure him that he should disregard a critical comment that he hears in the American media. We have this free press thing here, and we can't shut them up. But they said they would take off from Voice of America, take off critics of their friend Saddam. He invited Iraqi nuclear engineers to the United States for advanced training in weapons production. This is right after the Iraq-Iran war, along with sanctions against Iran. And then it continues without a break up to the present. There have been repeated opportunities for a settlement of whatever the issues are. And so, for example, in, I guess it was 2010, an agreement was reached between Brazil, Turkey, and Iran for Iran to ship out its low-enriched uranium for storage elsewhere, Turkey, and in return, the West would provide the isotopes that Iran needs for its medical reactors. When that agreement was reached, it was bitterly condemned in the United States by the president, by Congress, by the media. Brazil was attacked for breaking ranks and so on. The Brazilian foreign minister was sufficiently annoyed so that he released a letter from Obama to Brazil proposing exactly that agreement, presumably on the assumption that Iran wouldn't accept it. When they did accept it, they had to be attacked for daring to accept it. It's 2012, there was to be a meeting in Finland, December, to take steps towards establishing a nuclear weapons-free zone in the region. This is an old request pushed initially by Egypt and the other Arab states back in the early 90s. There's so much support for it that the U.S. formally agrees, but not in fact, and has repeatedly tried to undermine it. This is under the UN auspices, and the meeting was supposed to take place in December. Israel announced that they would not attend. Question on everyone's mind is, how will Iran react? They said that they would attend unconditionally. A couple of days later, Obama canceled the meeting, claiming the situation's not ripe for it and so on. But that would be, even steps in that direction would be an important move towards eliminating whatever issue there might be. Of course, the stumbling block is that there is one major nuclear state, Israel. And if there's a Middle East nuclear weapons-free zone, there would be inspections, and neither Israel nor the United States will tolerate that.
I want to ask you about major revelations that have been described as the biggest leak since Edward Snowden. Last week, Al Jazeera started publishing a series of spy cables from the world's top intelligence agencies. In one cable, the Israeli spy agency Mossad contradicts Prime Minister Netanyahu's own dire warnings about Iran's ability to produce a nuclear bomb within a year. In a report to South African counterparts in October 2012, the Israeli Mossad concluded Iran is not performing the activity necessary to produce weapons. The assessment was sent just weeks after Netanyahu went before the UN General Assembly with a far different message. Netanyahu held up a cartoonish diagram of a bomb with a fuse to illustrate what he called Iran's alleged progress on a nuclear weapon.
This is a bomb. This is a fuse. In the case of Iran's nuclear plans to build a bomb, this bomb has to be filled with enough enriched uranium. And Iran has to go through 3 stages. By next spring, at most by next summer, at current enrichment rates, they will have finished the medium enrichment and move on to the final stage. From there, it's only a few months, possibly a few weeks, before they get enough enriched uranium for the first bomb. A red line should be drawn right here. Before Iran completes the second stage of nuclear enrichment necessary to make a bomb.
That was Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in September 2012. The Mossad assessment contradicting Netanyahu was sent just weeks after, but it was likely written earlier. It said Iran, quote, does not appear to be ready, unquote, to enrich uranium to the highest levels needed for a nuclear weapon. A bomb would require 90% enrichment, but Mossad found Iran had only enriched to 20%. That number was later reduced under an interim nuclear deal the following year. The significance of this, Noam Chomsky, as Prime Minister Netanyahu prepares for this joint address before Congress to undermine a U.S.-Iranian nuclear deal?
Well, the striking aspect of this is the chutzpah involved. I mean, Israel has had nuclear weapons for probably 50 years or 40 years. They have estimates are maybe 100, 200 nuclear weapons, and they are an aggressive state. Israel's invaded Lebanon 5 times. It's carrying out an illegal occupation, carries out brutal attacks like Gaza last summer, and they have nuclear weapons. But the main story is that if, incidentally, the Mossad analysis corresponds to U.S. intelligence analysis. They don't know if Iran is developing nuclear weapons. But I think the crucial fact is that even if they were, what would it mean? It would be, just as U.S. intelligence analyzes it, it would be part of a deterrent strategy. They couldn't use a nuclear weapon. They couldn't even threaten to use it. Israel, on the other hand, has, in fact, threatened the use of nuclear weapons a number of times.
So why is Netanyahu doing this?
Because he doesn't want to have a deterrent in the region. That's simple enough. If you're an aggressive, violent state, you want to be able to use force freely. You don't want anything that might impede it.
Do you think this in any way has undercut the U.S. relationship with Israel, the Netanyahu-Obama conflict, that what Susan Rice has called destructive?
There's undoubtedly a personal relationship which is hostile, but that's happened before. Back in around 1990, under first President Bush, James Baker went as far as Secretary of State telling Israel, we're not going to talk to you anymore. If you want to contact me, here's my phone number. And in fact, the U.S. imposed mild sanctions on Israel, enough to compel the prime minister to resign and be replaced by someone else. But that didn't change the relationship, which is based on deeper issues than personal antagonisms.